Two wild animals in North America have had a profound impact on the ancient and modern history of the continent. One is a semi-aquatic rodent, building structures across wetlands and forests, and the other is a massive bovine that runs across the open, grassy plains. The history of the lands that make up the US and Canada are rather murky before the arrival of Europeans, as the natives did not have any written records, but rather an oral tradition. Before humans arrived in North America, beavers played a significant role in shaping the environment. They are nature's engineers, and their building of dams led to the changing of waterways as well as the spread of wetlands. Their mastery of water and wood ended up providing breeding grounds for insects, which supply much of the aquatic food chain, and the spread of wetlands provided more water to various locations, leading to greater biodiversity. On the other hand, the bison are the largest terrestrial animals in the Americas, and they turn the grasses on the open plain into fat and protein, which could feed wolves and other predators on these open plains, as well as humans. They were so numerous that some have called this period of time the American Serengeti. The native peoples utilized both of these animals. Beavers were used for clothing, and the wetlands they created brought not only water but also game. This was particularly important for people in the northeast, where beavers were the most abundant due to the cooler temperatures and access to woodlands and water. Along the Great Plains, the various native tribes would rely on the bison for nearly everything. Meat for food, fat for cooking, bones for tools, leather for clothing and teepees. With the exception of stone, firewood, and water, the bison was the giver of nearly everything. As a result, despite hunting the animals, the natives oftentimes saw them as symbols of strength and their reliance on nature. As European settlers arrived, first briefly with the Vikings and then permanently with the Spanish, French, English, Dutch, and others, Europeans took great interest in the beaver and later the bison. Beavers were coveted for their pellets as high-end fashion in Europe. Rugged French and Scottish fur trappers would explore the frigid forests of what are now Quebec, Ontario, and beyond looking for beavers to hunt, or getting them from the natives in exchange for guns and other European products. This led to a complex relationship of both conflict and cooperation between European explorers and indigenous peoples. Some would intermarry, resulting in the Métis people. The British Hudson Bay Company would privately own a gigantic chunk of northern and central Canada without the full consent of the natives. On the French side, the fur trade led to cities like Montreal and Quebec City, turning into major urban centers for French immigrants and later other groups. The French also explored much of what is now Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri, all the way down to New Orleans, partly in search of beaver pellets. In an attempt to monopolize the fur trade with Europeans, the Iroquois alliance of Native Americans, backed up by England and later Britain, fought against the Huron, Algonquin, Erie, and other tribes who were backed by the French during the Beaver Wars. In their drive for territory and power, the Iroquois committed what would be called today mass ethnic cleansing against various other indigenous peoples to take over the fur trade around the Greater Lakes areas. The Iroquois would eventually become the dominant Native American group and close allies of the British, which signaled France's diminishing role in North America, generally speaking, despite getting along better with most Native American tribes. The Beavers during the Beaver Wars were neutral, as they were during the 7 Years' War between France and Britain. The British eventually won the 7 Years' War and won dominance over eastern North America. The lands owned by the Hudson Bay Company would eventually belong to the British Empire, as the HBC decided to use this experience with fashion to open up what is pretty much Canada's version of Sears department stores. And it is one of the oldest stores in the world. The beaver pellet trade eventually moved west along the pioneers in the Pacific Northwest, as well as during the California Gold Rush. But changing fashion trends and different economic priorities put beaver trades on the decline. However, despite this decline, the beavers have played such a critical role in both the natural and human history of the eastern third of North America. To this day, beavers are symbols of hard work, engineering, and productivity, and they're Canada's national animal. and thankfully their populations have rebounded, unlike their European counterparts. As Europeans moved into the Great Plains, first with the Spanish coming from the south and then the Anglos coming from the east, they oftentimes clashed with the tribes of natives along the plains, who played a far greater resistance to European colonization and repression than those in the eastern third of the United States, Canada, and elsewhere. The Europeans and later Americans, Mexicans, and Canadians would oftentimes exchange and trade of land for guns, alcohol, and horses. By this time, these natives had used horses taken from the Spanish, or feral horses left by the Spanish, to ride across the open plains hunting bison. This, alongside the use of guns, led to a reduction in the population of bison on the open range, as well as a reduction in their physical range as a whole. On top of that, given how reliant the natives were on bison, Europeans oftentimes hunted them in mass to cut off food supplies for the natives. In modern days, this could be considered a form of ecocide. The mass culling resulted in a population bottleneck, in which bison to this day have a pretty low amount of genetic diversity. Much of the Great Plains got turned into either grain fields, ranches, cities, and subdivisions, and the American Serengeti was no more. Thankfully, with the advent of national parks, some bison were rescued. The range of both the plains bison and the woods bison today is a fraction of what it once was, but at the very least there are areas where they're protected. And their population has rebounded in national parks, and they have also been ranched for beef and leather. Today they're no longer threatened. They are also kind of the official animal of the United States along with the bald eagle, and they are found on countless US seals, flags, and other forms of iconography. Looking back at it, both of these animals played such a fundamental role in what this continent, for better or for worse, in environmental, social, economic, and political terms. Both were exploited almost to the point of no return, but eventually rebounded when North America's environmental, economic, political, social, and technological trends changed. And to top it off, while all of this was happening, neither of these animals were conscious of just how big of an impact their species had.